Well done. Your lords and masters.
Hello and welcome to day 2 of the Genesis of Androzani Advent Calendar for 2020. I'm here again with Adam for another video.
Hello.
2 in a row. This time we're going to be doing something that I think, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think has been requested before at some point, I believe.
Yeah.
It's something that I've briefly actually done on the Twitter already. So in regards to my opinions on this matter, people will probably already know what it's going to be, but having said that, because it's a video format, I'll be able to go more in depth. But they don't know yours, and basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be ranking all of the regeneration scenes
Yes, indeed.
in Doctor Who, featuring the Doctor, obviously, because there are regeneration scenes that are in the show that aren't the Doctor's, like the Master and Romana. But we thought for this list it would be better to just have the Doctor's regenerations, because that just makes more sense.
Yeah.
But we could briefly touch on them if we want to. But yeah, we're going to be doing the actual just regenerations itself. We're not going to be talking about necessarily the story as a whole, although that will factor into it for sure. And we're not talking about post-regeneration stories either, because that's definitely a whole nother
that's
topic.
a can of worms of its own.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about all the regenerations from worst to best. Basically, we're going to rank it in the similar way that we've done rankings before. Where it's like, we go from the bottom all the way to the top, one by one, and if we had them at the same level.
Yep.
So yeah, this should be interesting. Anything you want to say before we get into it?
No, let's rock and roll.
Alright, so before we get into the ranking, I just wanted to quickly touch on some of the regenerations that we've had outside of the Doctor in the show.
Yes, let's go for it.
So off the top of my head, the one that's the most obvious to talk about is the Master. We obviously had Derek Jacobi to John Sim in Utopia.
Yes, which was, I think people can probably guess by now, we think is sublime.
Yeah, it honestly might be my favourite regeneration scene in the whole show.
It's so powerful and just so sort of chaotic with everything going on around it, and just the way it sort of ties the whole series together, and that it has that sort of linchpin of the arc. It's bloody brilliant. Everything
from the fact that it's Chantho that shoots him, to then the Doctor seeing him and realising who it is, and with like the pocket watch, and then that brilliant dialogue from Jacobi where he says, "If the Doctor can be young and strong, then so can I."
Yes.
The Master Reborn. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The Master Reborn.
And then that perfectly transitions to John Sim, who has the loudest scream.
Yeah, such a high decibel.
I think one thing that Russell T absolutely nailed in writing the dialogue is that Derek Jacobi and John Sim are very different as the Master. Yet somehow he manages in that scene to make them feel like the same character.
Definitely. There's that sort of that through line, which is really important in transitioning. Here's all the things that are different about this version, but here are certain similarities which remain steadfast.
And one of my favourite things about the John Sim Master, which I'm sure we'll get into when we eventually get to the Sound of Drums with Jake, is I love the fact that the Master is trying so hard to be like the 10th Doctor, but evil.
Yes. He's trying to mimic him.
Yeah, and it's mocking, and I love that.
Yeah.
So
the John Sim regeneration was ostensibly, the body was selected out of spite.
Yes.
And that's very Master.
Yes. And in regards to the Master, that's the only real sort of like traditional regeneration we see, because apart from that, it's stealing bodies, like Geoffrey Beevers to Anthony Ainley. I love that one. That one's brilliant. Keeper of Trocken. It's a great twist to the end of the story and leads perfectly into Legopolis. I mean, Keeper of Trocken is kind of like the Utopia of season 18, really.
Yeah, I think that's an apt comparison.
Yeah, except it would be like if Chantho became one of the companions. Yeah. And then you've also got in the TV movie when Gordon Tipple gets shot, turned into a jizz snake, and then it takes Eric Roberts' body.
Correct. Yes. It's quite something.
And then you've got the double death with John Sim and Michelle Gomez in The Doctor Falls, where you don't see the regeneration, but you do see them die.
There's sort of a deliberate level of ambiguity there, even though it's quite solid and definitive. There is potentiality for more in between those two.
Mm-hmm. And apart from that, we've also got Romana's regeneration and Destiny of the Daleks. Now, I haven't seen that story yet, but I have seen that scene. It's very Douglas Adams.
Yes, it very much is.
Because she's trying on different faces and clothes, almost like when you're at the shop and you've got a bunch of clothes to put on, and you come in and out of the changing room. It's really funny. It's quite a different take on a regeneration.
Yeah, but it's quite I quite enjoy it. Yeah,
and I kind of like the whole thing of she saw that whoever that character was in Armageddon Factor, another story I haven't seen yet. But she sees the character that Lala Ward plays in Armageddon Factor, and she says, I think I want to look like that.
It just does it.
Yeah. Oh, it's wild. And then, I don't know if it really counts. I suppose it does. You've obviously got Mel's to Alex Kingston and Let's Kill Hitler with River Song.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have much to say with that because we never really got to know Mel's as a character, and the regeneration is sort of more just surprise.
Yeah, there's also the bit where she regenerates as a child in Day of the Moon as well, in the alleyway. Yeah, that was weird. And I can't specifically think of any. As I suppose there's we haven't counted any of the ones from the Timeless Children because they're not really on-screen doctors, if you know what I mean.
And there's also other ones like periphery Time Lord characters getting who only appear in one or two stories.
What I will say is I do like the fake regeneration scene from the Next Doctor, where it goes from Tennant to Morrissey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Morrissey's whole Doctor, that Jackson Lake Doctor is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And I will also say rest in peace to pre-2013 8th to 9th Doctor Regeneration YouTube videos.
Yes.
I remember it was the picture of him from the TV movie The Watch, and then it's Eccleston's face appearing on top of it. We're also not going to count the First Doctor's one from Twice Upon a Time, because that's a retcon. It's not the real one.
Yeah. And also, it doesn't... in terms of the story, it does change it a little bit in the narrative going forward. But in terms of the actual events of what we see on screen in that regeneration, it doesn't actually change it.
Yeah, although I will say I do quite like that scene.
I do too. It's just that
Murray Gold's last original track in the show, I believe, is Vale Eunice, which is a remix of Vale de Shem, but it's for the First Doctor. That's pretty cool. All right, I can't think of any others. There's probably others in Big Finish that I don't know about.
At us in the comments, I'm sure.
Yeah, because we never really see people like Omega and Rassilon regenerate. They just come back as a different actor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so shall we move on to the actual list itself?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, so we have 13 here, obviously, and we're going to start at the bottom.
Yep.
Who should go first?
You can go first.
All right, I'll go first because people on Twitter already know my answers, so yours will be the more anticipated ones. So yeah, like I said, if we get any at the same level, we'll snap and talk about them together. Right. So my number 13 at the very bottom. This is quite a divisive one.
Yeah.
Depending on your thoughts on certain things about the scene. I've heard mixed reactions all across the board, not just within specific fan circles. I've heard everyone I've talked about this regeneration scene has given me a mixed opinion. Some people love it, some people hate it. For me, it's the only one that whenever I watch, there's that Doctor Who video on YouTube of all the regenerations in order on the Doctor Who channel. This is the only one that I feel an urge to turn it off when it comes on. And that is the most recent one, which is the 12th Doctor's regeneration scene from Twice Upon a Time.
Okay.
So, one big positive... Actually, no, there's a couple of big positives. Firstly, they play the shepherd's boy, which is great.
Yes.
And secondly, everything with Jodie Whittaker is great. I love that scene, especially the direction. Rachel Talele's direction of that scene is superb.
And and the way it actually transitions, just subconsciously, it transitions into the new cameras and the new lenses and everything that they're using. And they don't make it a big deal. It's just sort of like, oh, it's her POV now. It's changed.
Yeah. So I do like that. But the actual 12th Doctor speech itself, it's just so long. And it's not only is it long, but it goes into areas that I just don't like. Because like it starts off with, you know, his typical, oh, I'm breaking the fourth wall, talking to the TARDIS and the audience at the same time. You know, it's just like, I've got a few things to say to you. And then, you know, he dances around the stairs and he's just like, you know, it's all about don't never have any pears. And it's all about like, you know, being kind and all that, which is just sort of like plastering his character arc into words. But then it's once it gets to the bit where he starts talking about like his name and the children, that's when it loses me completely. I really don't like the bit where he's like, if your heart's in the right place and the stars are too, children can hear your name. And apparently that was a bit of dialogue written by the actor himself. It wasn't a Moffat line. But yeah, no, the whole thing of like, I just remember when I was first watching it, like when he gets to the whole bit with like laugh hard, run fast, be kind, I was just like, this is just taking way too long. I just want it to be over. And I shouldn't feel like that. You know, I know that holding on and, squeezing as much emotion as you can out of a dramatic scene can be effective, which I'll talk about with a scene that comes later in this list. But it's just, this one just got excessive, and I just don't like it. I don't like how it's too long, and I don't like how, it tries too hard to be like poetic and meaningful, and then I don't like the bit about the children knowing his name. I get why he did it, but I just don't like it. And I also don't like the special effects either of the regeneration. It's like a lightning bolt.
They're very long, yeah.
It looks like a lightning bolt, and the CGI on it's really cheap. So yeah, sorry, but that's my least favourite, is the 12th Doctors from Twice Upon a Time.
Fair enough.
What is your number 13?
Now, my number 13 is a tricky one, because there's technically two versions of it.
Oh, yes.
However, as a whole picture, it's wonderful. If you add... Okay, I'm just going to say what it is. It's from 6 to 7. It's from Colin Baker to Sylvester McCoy. Mm-hmm. If you add in the last show or whatever, the big finale...
The Brink of Death. The Brink of Death.
Yes.
Yeah. The
Brink of Death. The farewell episode in Big Finish to the Sixth Doctor, where Colin Baker actually got to do the regeneration. Mm-hmm. It's really, really strong. And as you linked to me earlier, and I've seen before, and I'm sure many people have seen who follow this channel, there's someone who actually animated and put that audio over the top of like a slightly re-edited and reworked version of that ending to give it more of the impact it deserves. However, despite all that, I still can't get away from the fact that that's Sylvester McCoy in a wig.
Yeah.
And that they fired Colin Baker. Mm-hmm. And they're just like, it just.
And if you're just talking about the TV show, you just got whatever's at the start of Time in the Rani.
Yeah, the TARDIS goes spinning out. We don't even see the Doctor fall to the ground. He's just on the ground, and he gets turned over in an obvious wig, and then regenerates. And it's just nothing. It's just a nothing regeneration, and it really sucks because, as people know, I love the Sixth Doctor, and I think the way that regeneration unfolded, even with the brilliant story that Big Finish did, it still just doesn't click for me, unfortunately. And it really sucks, because I like both the 6th and the 7th Doctor quite a bit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think backstage politics had everything to do with that one.
Oh, totally. Totally.
Yeah. Like, this came down to the BBC forcing John Nathan Turner to fire Colin Baker, but then also saying, can you come back for the first story and then you'll die at the end? And Colin said, oh no, that's not going to happen.
You're fucked,
if you don't want me on the show, then I'm not going to be on the show. Goodbye.
Yeah.
But as most things with the Sixth Doctor, the Big Finish they created this story with the Valeyard called the Brink of Death.
Yes.
And gave him an actual fitting in. I love... Oh, actually, no. I'll leave it till when I talk about it.
Yeah.
Getting into it, yeah.
But yeah, no, it's one that, even with the brilliant Big Finish story, it just doesn't sit right with me.
Alrighty. So, my number 12 is the War Doctor's Regeneration from Day of the Doctor.
Uh-huh.
Yes, so... Okay. It's because I get the whole thing if he's wearing a bit thin, but it definitely just comes out of nowhere, doesn't it? It just happens. Like, he just walks into his TARDIS and it's like, oh, it's time to die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't bother me so much because in my head when watching it, I sort of got especially because of Night of the Doctor. We see when he regenerated, he was young John Hurt.
Yeah.
So he's been doing this for hundreds of years
of course.
As the War Doctor. And in my head, the only reason he was still the War Doctor is because he felt he had that purpose. And now once his brain was like, for this last moment, I am the Doctor once more. Once he accepted that, his body was like, okay, now I can let go. And I totally get where you're coming from. It does come out of nowhere. But for me... that mental gymnastics sort of justifies it in my head for why it didn't feel out of the blue entirely for me. I'm like, okay, sure.
What I will say, though, is, again, like with the one that you just talked about, there is a fan edit of this scene which drastically improves it. It's not like it obviously uses footage that's, existing from Doctor Who and from Second Coming. Because the one thing that I hated about this when I first saw it is that we saw Eccleston's eyes, but then it just cut away. And I was like, no, I want to see the Ninth Doctor. But then obviously you couldn't do that because Eccleston didn't want to be in it.
Yeah, of course.
But I mean, Stephen Moffat did what he did. He did what he could. I think it's a sweet moment. I like Hurt's sort of final words. Him saying, "I hope the ears are a bit less conspicuous" is a funny last line. Yeah, it's fine. It's whatever. I honestly, I think a lot of people forget it exists sometimes.
Yeah, because it is very blink and you'll miss it.
Yeah, but it's just like, it was kind of a box ticking thing where it's like, we have to do it, so we might as well.
We have to close off that arc, so
yeah.
it's just...
But, again, speaking of Big Finish, I hope that when they get because they are getting the Ninth Doctor on Big Finish now, I hope that they film that scene again and have Eccleston lead on from it. Like, I hope
I'd love to hear Eccleston's first moments as the Doctor, so we truly get that. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, that would be great. But yeah, it's whatever. It's fine. I don't really care. I don't really have a much feeling about it whatsoever. It's just...
Yeah. That's fair enough.
Again, like, the reason why I put it over the 12th Doctor's one is at least I can watch it and I like it. I don't feel like it drags on so much that I want to turn it off. So, yeah whatever. That's my number 12. What's your number... wait, have 12. You done your number 12? Yeah, number 12.
My number 12 is the 4th Doctor to the 5th Doctor.
Ooh, from Logopolis.
From Logopolis.
Ah, okay.
I just don't... it's fine. Very much like, it's just sort of... With for the regeneration scene itself, and he sees the companions, and he sees the Master, and he's like, no, I'm going to be motivated to go on, and it's like, okay, cool, here's Peter Davison, and people are like, the Watcher was the Doctor the whole time. It just... Again, it's just something that does nothing for me, especially because it's the 4th Doctor's ending, and it's just sort of like, he tripped and fell. Even though I know there's more going on than that, it just sort of, it's just a bit nothing to me, especially for such a big character.
Interesting. I'll get on to that one when I get to that one.
Yeah.
Alright.
But it's just, I mean, I really don't have much to say about it beyond that. It just doesn't quite click with me.
Interesting. Alright. Should I talk about my number 11?
Go for it.
Okay, my number 11 is the 6th Doctor's one from The Brink of Death and Time of the Rani.
Yes.
So if it was just Time of the Rani, it would obviously be at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But The Brink of Death does bump it up a bit for me. I really like how not only does the climax of The Brink of Death come with them finally facing the Valeyard one more time,
Yeah.
Which closes off that whole unanswered thing from Trial of a Time Lord.
Yes, indeed.
But also, I love the fact that in his final moments, the Seventh Doctor like guides him into death. It's quite a Seventh Doctor thing for him to do, you know?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's that sort of ethereal wizardry thing.
Yeah. So again, like Big Finish is the only reason it's up here because the time in the Rani scene is pretty awful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
And it's certainly not helped by Kath McCulloch's blaringly garish music. But whatever, it's fine. But I again, like I said, the brink of death helps. And that small detail of storytelling that Big Finish did bumps it above the War Doctor and the 12th Doctor for me. So
fair enough.
That's the main reason why. But in effect, especially with the TV version, it's still weak. It's still one of the weaker ones, sadly.
Yeah.
But I am glad that Colin got to finally have his turn at doing it for real. So that's good. What's your number 11?
My number 11 is the First Doctor into the Second Doctor.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. Obviously, it's a huge impact, and its significance cannot be understated because we wouldn't have the show still today if it weren't for this scene. However, because we're mainly just talking about the scenes, other than it sort of being just a shocking cliffhanger of, oh my god, he's changed into a different person, there's not much there. And that's not the fault of anyone involved, because it was the first time they did it. It's still a great scene. It just, in terms of what excites me about Regeneration, and also being just generally a younger fan, you know, in terms of what I grew up with in terms of Doctor Who, this Regeneration is so significant, so important, brilliantly done, but it's just one that I don't find myself thinking about Doctor Who Regenerations. It's not one I find myself thinking about that often.
Yeah, it's alright. It's where it all started, though.
Of course it is. It absolutely is. But it's just, I just don't, as a scene, it just doesn't excite me. You know, it's so important and so significant. But because we are talking about just our personal tastes in terms of where it fits and compared to other Regenerations, just doesn't click for me. Mm-hmm. Because and there's nothing like, I think it's good. I think it's very, very good. It's just that it just happens, and obviously there's very good reasons for that. William Hartnell's health was failing, and they wanted to keep the show on the road, and they were like, okay, let's do this big dramatic twist, and it's a wonderful twist, and it's, as I said, a stroke of genius, so they could keep the show going forever and ever, it seems. Mm-hmm. But it just doesn't quite, you know. When I watch it, I'm just like, that's cool. But I just more get excited about thinking, oh, I'd love to watch another Patrick Troughton episode, or go back and watch another William Hartnell episode. I don't think about the transition itself, you know?
Alright.
Yeah.
Okay. Should I move on to my next one?
Go for it.
Okay, my number 10. So this is when it starts to get good.
Yep.
This one I'm really conflicted on. The things I love about it, I love. The things I don't like about it, I don't like.
Yep.
It's the 11th Doctor's one from Time of the Doctor.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so this one I remember when I first watched it, I cried. 2013. This one is... there's quite a lot for this one, because I really don't like the episode. And the first regeneration scene in the episode, not the final one, but the one where he's on the clock tower, I really don't like.
Yeah.
When, you know, Clara asks the Time Lords to bring him back for love or something, and then he blows up all the ships and it's like a nuclear bomb. It's just ridiculous. But then you get the second scene in the TARDIS, which is the real one.
Yeah. And
it's... there's parts of it I think are great. I think where it sort of loses me is when he breaks the fourth wall. I get taken out of the story when he says, you know, we all change, I will not forget one line of this. And I think it just takes me out of the story a bit. But the part before that is actually really good. Before that point. And I'm also kind of... I think I do get the whole thing of... Because it was like... At the start of Series 5, which is the start of Matt's run, he was, Amelia Pond's imaginary friend. Mm-hmm. And then in this scene, at the end of his run, now she's his imaginary friend.
Yeah.
So I do like that. And I especially like the whole thing of him taking the bow tie off, and then you get the bit where Clara says, please don't change, and he just suddenly becomes Capaldi, and you get that...
Yes, it just snaps into it, yeah.
You get that great bit of direction where it flips from him being on one side of the screen to Capaldi being on the other.
Yeah.
That was great. And also, people saying that it's like, why is it different? You can imagine that because this is a different regeneration cycle, the effect would probably be different. Mm-hmm. Because he already had the big blast one outside.
Yeah.
I think it's really good. Also, like we mentioned in day 1, which was the previous day before this, I love the music in this scene.
Totally.
Trenzalore, the long song, Infinite Potential, Information is great. But it's just there's a few things about it that are a bit Moffat-y. Like there's the whole thing of where she comes into the TARDIS and he's walking up the stairs, and you're like, oh, is it going to be Capaldi? And then it's not. And it's almost like an anti-plot twist, where like the thing that you thought would be a great twist, it wasn't, and then it's like, well, why'd you do that? Yeah, I don't know. I think it's for the most part it's great. It's just there's a few things about it I'm not too keen on, and yeah, I also think Amy Pond being in the scene undermines Clara quite a lot, because when you watch that scene, it really makes Clara feel less significant.
It doesn't. It feels like, even though I understand the whole parallels of her being the first face that this face saw and everything, sort of bookending it. It's you're totally right. It does feel like it undermines her presence. Yeah,
and also because Clara's a new companion, and she in Series 7 she was a mystery box. She's just such an empty shell at this point, and there's just I don't feel sympathetic for her when she's feeling sad about him about to regenerate. Yeah, just I don't know. There's something missing. As is, I feel, with a lot of Smith stories, there's something missing in the character drama. But what I will say about it is I think Matt's acting in it is superb, and it's one of his best scenes.
It's flawless. Yeah, it's wonderful.
But yeah, I definitely prefer it to the Capaldi one, because it doesn't go on too long, which is good. It's just the right amount. I just think the part where he breaks the fourth wall is a bit much for me.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But that's no insult, because the rest of them on my list I actually think are great, so there you go.
Fantastic.
What is your number 10?
My number 10 is the second Doctor into the third Doctor.
Okay. From the War Games.
Now again, just like the first one, this is specifically about the scene. And as a cliffhanger, and as a moment for the character, and as a motivator for where this show goes, it's brilliant. But in terms of the scene itself and the transition and the Doctor spinning out into this void of nowhere after he sort of pleads like, no, I don't want that body, and the Time Lords are eventually like, okay, fuck it, we'll choose for you. You don't... Go, just get out of here. We'll turn you into John Pertwee. Be gone. It's brilliant, but as a regeneration... It's that same sort of thing where of like, okay, I can't wait for things either side of it. Like, I really want to rewatch the War Games, or I really want to watch Spearhead in Space, or From Space, and it's just, it's that thing of the actual transition itself doesn't not that it doesn't excite me, but it's not as much what my brain is thinking about when I think about this particular handover,
You never actually see the transition on TV.
Exactly.
There's a fan-made story called Devious where you do see it, but...
Yeah, and John Pertwee's in it, which is really strange.
Yeah, it's really strange.
I've seen it. And it's alright. I mean, that's... Whatever, he just sort of goes and sits in a chair and his
I
face
feel
changes.
Like... I've always felt like Devious is kind of fan fiction.
It totally is. It never... Yeah, it never quite clicked with me as, this is what happened.
Yeah. It's a bit like, maybe.
Yeah. Hypothetical.
All right. Anything else you want to say before I do my next
War
one?
Games is fucking brilliant. It is. It's genius. It absolutely is. It's just that regeneration scene, just doesn't...
Would you think it's
what excites me?
I mean, do you think part of it is because they hadn't actually cast the third Doctor yet, so they didn't know what to do?
Yeah, I think part of it is because there isn't that... Even if with the spinning weirdness, even if that ended with just a body face down and we don't see who it is or whatever, even though I know the next reveal is the TARDIS lands and it's in colour and then he falls out the TARDIS and it's John Pertwee.
God, that would have been interesting to see John Pertwee in black and white at the end of the War Games.
Yeah, but even then, that's the thing of, like, I'm talking about what comes next as opposed to the scene itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of theories about Season 6B as well.
Yes.
So it's kind of been left open-ended. Should I go on to my number 9?
Go for it.
So speaking of John Pertwee, my number 9 is the Third Doctor's regeneration from Planet of the Spiders.
Aha!
Yes. So, this is the first one on the list where I pretty much like it all the way through.
Yeah.
So I remember the first time I saw it, I was very confused by it, but once I actually watched Planet of the Spiders, it made a lot more sense. And it's the fact that, also I think in Planet of the Spiders there is a regeneration scene that we didn't talk about, because there is a Time Lord in Planet of the Spiders.
Oh, yes.
And he's in this scene. So, I think what's interesting about Planet of the Spiders' regeneration scene is it's kind of tonal whiplash when you think about it.
It totally is, yeah.
But in a way, it kind of works because it removes a lot of the dread, and it kind of pushes it, and it doesn't go back and forth. It only goes in one way, so it does work in some respect. And it also works really well for comedy as well. But basically, I think the section where the Doctor falls out of the TARDIS, and because Sarah Jane is like, I feel like I've lost him forever, and Brigadier's there, and then he materializes and falls out, and you get the last lines from Pertwee. I think those are brilliant. That the whole section of that is just awesome. Some of the best acting from those three in the whole show.
Totally.
It almost looks like a stage play.
Yeah.
It
does have that feel.
It's like, it's I had to face my fear, and thus more important than going on living. Please don't die. And then a tear, Sarah Jane. No, don't cry. While there's life, there's that part's great.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, I can't remember which incarnation it is, but it's like, I think he's called Choji, appears and explains to Sarah Jane and the Brigadier how regeneration works, because Planet of the Spiders is the first story where they actually say regeneration, I believe, or at the very least explain how it works.
Yeah, what it is, yeah.
And so it does make for some good comedy. I like how the Brigadier's like, who the hell is this? And then Sarah Jane tries to explain it. He's like, right, that makes things quite clear.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go with it. The Brigadier's usual unfazed mode.
Yeah, of course. After all this time, he's constantly still surprised by the Doctor. And all of his stuff. I especially remember that scene in The Three Doctors when he sees the TARDIS and he's like, no, I didn't believe it, and I still don't, and I'm here. But yeah, I think it's really good. I just think that tonal whiplash is what holds it back from being higher. Because apart from that, it's pretty perfect. Like, the whole scene with Pertwee and Sarah Jane before he dies is great. The only other nitpick I have in terms of continuity is that when he regenerates into Tom Baker has short hair, and then in Robot he has long hair.
Yeah.
And that's always frustrated me.
But maybe it just puffs out.
Yes.
Like a little excess of regeneration energy.
Yes.
As he sits up.
And the transition effect that they use isn't as good as it is in the 10th Planet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, your number 9.
My number 9 is the most fucked one. It's the 7th to the 8th. I love it because it just ties in with this sort of weird decision to make the transition a gothic horror inspired thing inside this very cold, steely morgue after the Doctor's been shot and operated on. The operation failed horrifically, and his body has a late coming regeneration, and it, like the noise of the bone crunching without any sort of like light beam or anything like that, and just the bones crunching as McCoy's face scrunches up, and McGahn coming out of that only to sit up, and we see his breath sort of filter out in this really freezing cold place as that one slit of light is over his eyes, like the old Captain Kirk shot from Star Trek. And it's just gorgeously shot the way he sits up. And obviously there's the mortician who's watching Frankenstein, and there's that
it's alive! It's alive!
And then he sort of goes, oh my god, and he passes out, which again is speaking of tonal whiplash. However, everything up until the point where the guy passes out, I adore. I think it's the most horrific and wonderful thing. I remember I showed it to my sister and my mate James, who'd never seen it before. They knew about it, but they'd never seen it. And they watched it, and they turned to me as the bones were crunching, and they're like, what the fuck are we watching?
Yeah.
And that visceral reaction that they got made me enjoy it even more. I think it's so bizarre a choice and so just gross. It's so gross, and the idea to make the regeneration kind of a body horror-esque event was quite inspired, and I actually really, really appreciate it. I really like that transition.
All right. Should I go on to my number 8?
Go for it.
Okay, so my number 8 is the first Doctor's regeneration in the 10th planet.
Aha!
Yeah. So I've mentioned this about the 10th planet before. It's probably, for me, the most real feeling Doctor Who story there is. It's one of them, at least. It feels like a biopic of the future. You know?
Yeah.
It's almost like a pure historical in the future. Because the Cybermen is something that actually could happen.
Totally.
And it's not just about the Cybermen, though, and the whole way the story's shot and presented. It's also the First Doctor and his characterization in that story. And I love how his death feels like a real person dying.
Yes. Yes.
And so, speaking specifically of the regeneration scene, starting after the Cybermen have been neutralized, and Ben and Polly find him just sort of lingering in this corner. And they're just like, wakey, wakey, Doctor! And he pops up and says, you said it's all over. Oh, it's far from being all over. I must get back to the TARDIS. I love the fact that the Doctor knows exactly what's about to happen, but no one else knows. And that makes Ben and Polly a great audience surrogate. Because they know as much about the Doctor's situation as we do. And on top of that, you obviously get the bit where, he falls in the TARDIS, and you get... It's not like fully found, but there is a small clip of it. You get this bit where he's on the console and he's about to materialize, and he has this slow, like, sudden look that he does. It's not quite at the camera, and I believe David Bradley like mimics this in Twice Upon a Time as well.
Yes, yeah.
And it's just this. It's this specific look that the Doctor often has of age. Of this
very withered.
Yeah, very withered. And that, for me, adds a lot to it. It's this very subtle... I wish the whole episode was found, because then we can actually see the performance in full, and it's full.
And I think part of, William Hartnell being ill in real life really elevates that particular element of it.
Yeah.
It adds a certain weight to it.
Absolutely. And also on top of that, like, just Ben and Polly just find him on the floor.
Yeah.
And they're just so confused, and then the transition, the way they did it with the high contrast and the transition between Hartnell and Troughton is just so well done. Like for 1966, the effects on it are great.
Yeah. It's a wonderful transition.
I just think that, like, I've always liked the scene, but especially when I actually watched the 10th Planet in full, I just really got a chilling feeling of how real it was. I was just like, this feels like an actual death. And that makes it unique. That stands out for me. And I think that's also very fitting of the First Doctor, because out of all the Doctors, he's the one that feels more like he's the one that feels the most like a real person.
Yeah.
And yeah, that just, to me, that's quite a special thing about it.
Totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally see where you're coming from.
Yeah. All right. So what's your number 8?
My number 8 is the War Doctor to the 9th in Night of the Doctor.
You mean
in Day of the Doctor.
Day of the Doctor.
in Day of the Doctor. I really like it for the reasons I was talking about before. It is totally headcanon-y. It's not something that's so much in the text, but what my brain got out of it.
In Moffat style, it's left up to interpretation, really.
Exactly, and the interpretation I pulled out from it, that I extrapolated, just works for me, and I really enjoyed it. And the fact, especially listening to, because people probably know, I love the War Doctor as a concept. I think it's brilliant. And in Big Finish, I've been hoping, now that they are doing more War Doctor as a young man, which is something that I wanted to, write fan versions of, is wonderful, because I love this idea of this vicious version of the Doctor who's just callous because he has to be.
Yeah.
Or he thinks he has to be, but actually what he learns is that he can let go. He's allowed to be the Doctor. He's not denied who he is entirely, but to go through that whole arc and listening to things on Big Finish where the War Doctor has an edge, even though he's not quite as harsh as I'd hoped he'd be.
Yeah, I've heard the first 2 box sets. Not the rest of it yet, but and he does do harsh things, but they're not quite on the level of the things that he talks about. The things he's done.
Yes, yeah, exactly. He's really like he's gruff and he's agitated, but he's never fully callous.
I think Big Finish, they capture the complexity of the stories well. They just don't quite go all in on the monster.
Totally, but even so, the Big Finish story still ties into this idea that I had about the reason why he starts to regenerate. There is he's allowed himself to let go, and he thinks the best way to move on from the war is to literally let go and allow this war-torn and broken down version of himself, which has been around for God knows how long, to say, okay, I can breathe a sigh of relief. I am the Doctor.
Yeah.
Now let's move on.
Well, I mean, it could be fueled by whatever the Sisterhood of Khan gave him.
Exactly.
Of that elixir of being a warrior, and once that warrior was gone, he was, that was all he had left.
Exactly. Totally. And it's just that thing of, it's a very simple one, and I agree, it is frustrating that we only see Christopher Eccleston's eyes. But as you said, I really like the quip at the end, and just the fact that he just feels at peace. Now, I know I'm going to annoy people by bringing this up, and if it doesn't work for people, I totally get it. I'm not here to start an argument. But for me, it rings the same as when Luke Skywalker faded away in The Last Jedi. Now, I know you don't like that either. However, what it does for me, in terms of the character, where this man accepts his place in the universe as a legend and is able to, I mean, obviously in episode 9, whatever, they didn't follow this through, yada, 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 whatever. But in the fact that he moved on to represent something, he reclaimed what it was that everyone else thought he should be after he had this, tremendous dip in what he perceived in his own life. He felt this sense of failure, and he overcame that at the end. And I know people really don't like that, and I acknowledge you.
Well, I can see
like it.
I mean, I can see in concept why you would draw that parallel.
Yeah, and it's just that thing of this old withered character who used to be this hero, realizing that's still in him, and he represents something larger than himself now.
I will say just briefly.
Yeah.
I do like the idea behind what Rian Johnson was going for. I just don't think it works. But I do understand where you're coming from.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with the War Doctor for me, is that acceptance of, I am a hero. I am something special. I am something more. Allowing himself to be this childhood hero that he was for, so many people around the world. metatextually, but also in the universe, also being a symbol of something, which is then carried through both Moffat and Russell's versions of this character when they say, the oncoming storm. He has this reputation, both negatively and positively, that, I'm the Doctor, I'm from the constellation of... I'm from Gallifrey, the planet Gallifrey and the constellation of Kasterborous, yada, 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 and the Voyage of the Damned, and that whole thing. And it's Moffat tying together both his and Russell's eras really, really nicely, and I think that's why I really, really like this one and put it above some of the older ones and more iconic ones, if that makes sense.
Yeah, actually, that does make sense. The only thing for me is that there's one very specific thing about Day of the Doctor that I don't like that Moffat did. And that's mainly to do with the fact that he retconned the Time War.
Yes, I totally. Again, that is something I agree with. I totally do. And it does change things, and obviously it led to a place that neither of us are particularly fond of.
Oh, no. Yeah, no.
However, that initial conceit of, again, it's one of those things of, I wish Eccleston's character could be there, because then both Eccleston, Tennant, and Smith's characters all had their unique arcs. They were repurposed, but fortunately in a way that obviously there was the whole memory wipe thing, because they had to. But the fact that Eccleston still felt that, but that the War Doctor felt that accomplishment before he went back into the grief.
Yeah, I know, but my biggest problem with it is mainly just when you rewatch the Russell stuff with the context of Day of the Doctor, it doesn't. The sting isn't as hard, because it's rather than the Doctor actually committed genocide and had to deal with the aftermath of that, it's the Doctor thinks he committed genocide but didn't. So it was like it's a misunderstanding rather than an actual, because what I loved about what Russell did was he essentially did, well, what if, because with Tom Baker and Genesis of the Daleks is like, do I have the right to do this? He says, what if the Doctor was driven to the point where he did what he didn't want to do in Genesis of the Daleks? And the Day of the Doctor kind of takes that away. It takes it like where the Doctor never actually did do that. And for me, that takes away a bit of the sting from a lot of the Davies era, because a lot of what makes that grief work for me is the fact that the Doctor was pushed to that point.
I totally get that complaint as well. I'm not going to disagree with you there. I totally get it. And I do feel like there is sort of a knock-on negative effect in terms of the impact of earlier episodes because of what this one does.
And also that retcon does leave a slight sour taste for the War Doctor for me. That's also a thing as well.
But again, the thing for me is also what the War Doctor did do in the war during Big Finish, even though it's not quite as harsh as I would like it. I'm hoping that they do go more harsh with the younger War Doctor stuff that they're about to release later on. But it's this thing of it's a double-edged sword. However, that scene in and of itself, what it represents in that story and what came before it, I think it works. It just works for me, and also I think John Hurt's performance is stellar. It's so understated.
Absolutely.
Especially compared to every regeneration in the modern story, in the modern series around him. His is the most understated and most just... It's a sense of relief. It's not sadness, it's not bitterness, it's not regret, it's relief and acceptance. And that's really nice. And I like that.
Yeah. Alright, so we got on quite a tangent. What number was that for you? That was number 8, right?
Correct.
Okay, so shall we move on to my number 7?
Go for it.
Okay, my number 7. This might surprise some people. My number 7 is the 10th Doctor's regeneration from the end of time.
Ooh.
It's really going to be really...
Actually, sorry. Yes, no, go on, sorry. Yep, go on.
What were we going to snap there?
Not quite.
Not quite? Okay. Yeah, so people might be surprised, because Tennant's my favourite Doctor. But it ends up in the middle of this list. interestingly. So I don't think it's as terrible as some people say it is, because some people say it's the worst one. I don't think it's the worst one by any stretch of the imagination. I think dramatically, from an acting, direction, and music standpoint, it's perfect. It's so good, with the whole section of the Ood saying "We'll sing you to your sleep," and that plays Vitalis de Shem. And you obviously get, because obviously with the 10th Doctor, his big sort of famous catchphrase was "Allons-y," which is French for "let's go." And then obviously in his final hours he says, "I don't want to go."
Yes.
And it's kind of this poetic ending. But I think the main reason why it doesn't end up higher is because, firstly, I just think the other ones above it, I'll obviously give reasons to why they are where they are. But there is something about it that does hold it back slightly.
Yeah.
I think it's mostly to do with not necessarily what leads up to it, but what comes after. Because I don't like Matt Smith's first scene.
Right.
In the End of Time. Like, that part of it for me is where it kind of falls. And,
yes.
There's just a few, I don't know what it is, there's something about it that's, there's a level of texture to the other ones above it that I will get into. But there's something about this one that I'm not 100% sure on. Obviously, when I first watched it as a kid, as a 12-year-old, I bawled my eyes out because it's Tennant leaving.
Yeah.
But rewatching it sort of more like a lot of the emotion removed and sort of looking at it more critically, I think a lot of the best parts of the End of Time's sort of climax comes before the regeneration scene.
I fully agree.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and because like I said, like, I love the scene where he dies when he goes into the chamber and it plays 4 knocks.
Yeah. And
obviously I do love Valley de Shem as a song for his final scene. But it's just, I don't know. It's good. It's really good. I get very emotional when I watch the story itself. But I just think the ones above it are better. As a regeneration scene. It's just like, just because he's my favourite Doctor doesn't mean I think he has the best regeneration scene. That's all. That's what I'm going to say. Yeah. But it's high enough it's high up on the list because of my emotional investment in it.
And I think sometimes you don't need to justify an emotional reaction to something. It just is. It just is what it is. Yeah,
I think it's just, again, like I said, the only real main criticism I have is I'm not too keen on the Smith scene. It's just a bit off-putting for me.
Fair enough.
I mean, there's a couple of lines of dialogue in it I do like the legs, I've still got legs, and he's still not ginger, like that stuff. Although, to be fair, that scene kind of feels like a rushed version of Born Again.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. It's good. It's really good. It's just not. It's not as bad as people who hate the story say. It's also not the best one. That's kind of where I would put it. I just think the ones above it, there's very special things about the 6 that I've put above it that I absolutely love, and I slightly prefer over this one. So
totally.
Yeah. Bit of a curveball. What's your number 7?
It is. My number 7 is 12 to 13.
It's the one that I put at the bottom.
Yes. Now, my reason for this is I just rewatched them all in preparation for this. And I found, maybe it's because part of me's been missing that almost nonsense fairy tale, because because of the way that the current series is running, where it's quite dry, for me at least, in terms of what I enjoy out of the show. It's quite dry. Having this sort of bombastic, very much over the top, way too long. You're totally right. This is one I can't really justify being as high as it is, other than the way I felt just rewatching it now. I just sort of like, oh man, Capaldi's good. Oh man, Murray Gold's good. Oh, that's the best TARDIS console that's ever been, in my opinion.
I do love the bit where he runs up to the library. That's great.
Yes, yeah, and just his sort of the way he's sort of flailing about, and even though yes, it's very odd and saccharine and weird when he starts saying, "Oh, some kids, if their heart's in the right place, they can hear your name." It's like, sure, why not? Whatever. Okay, that's nonsense. But you're regenerating. Your brain's gone frazzled. But I just really, really enjoyed it rewatching it, and it is, as you said, it's so excessive. It is too much, and I can't really justify why I put it where I have. It's just a gut feeling. I just really enjoyed Capaldi's performance and the music and everything, and even, as you said, the direction as Jodie emerges. And because initially I didn't like the close-up on the eyes until rewatching it now, and I noticed that they actually switch to different cameras and switch to different lenses, and the whole mood changes through her, and it's more so than when Smith exploded onto the scene. There is a distinct mission statement that this is new, and it's speaking about that moment, that regeneration. Even though the lightning effect I don't really like, I just found myself thoroughly enjoying it on rewatch. So that's why it's my number 7.
I will say I do love how Capaldi starts out like a skinhead and then he ends like with this massive hair.
Yes, his mane.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty sure like Capaldi in Twice Upon a Time has longer hair than Jodie has in Woman Who Fell to Earth.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Gender stereotypes be gone. My number 6 is the 7th Doctor in the TV movie.
Ah, yes.
It's so fucked. It's so messed up. I love it. It's like, I mean, people are like, why are you comparing the Doctor to Frankenstein? I'm like, why not?
Exactly,
why not?
Exactly. Totally.
And everything was leading up to, obviously, he's like, it's kind of a meme for me. It's like he walks out the TARDIS and gets shot by Americans, you know? It's just so typical. And then, you know, his first scene in America and he gets shot. And then he has that botched surgery and it's, the direction is like a nightmare
and
horror.
The opera's blaring.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you get the actual regeneration scene itself where that guy's watching Frankenstein. And then he's just inside the what do you call it, a morgue? Is it a morgue?
The morgue, yeah.
And it's just, there's this lightning and he's in this cold thing and the score with the chorus is amazing.
Yeah.
And just the way his body's twitching and his face is twisting and then he turns into him again and then like McCoy obviously being like, you know, that Dark Chessmaster quite messed up Doctor, right, with the whole surgery thing. He's great, and like I love his camp performance when he's getting operated on. But I love how it's like it's like this evil man finally getting his just desserts. And then when he wakes up, you get the 8th Doctor, who's, you know, like this ice cold zombie thing.
Yes, and he doesn't know who he is or what's going on. Or...
But like all of the manic energy is gone, and he's just this really smooth, like silky alien man. And there's something so chilling about that scene.
Yeah.
And I just like, I don't know, I think it's completely accidental because I don't think, you know, the people who made the TV movie really knew what they were doing.
No.
But it's a happy accident because it absolutely works for both characters.
Yeah, it's this tonal nightmare, but as you said, it just works.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's so cool. And it's like...
Absolutely.
It's like... Because, like, for example, if we compare to the one I ranked below it, the 10th Doctor scene is all on purpose. Everything is purposeful. Everything is, like, designed exactly the way Russell wants it to be. It's completely in line with everything that we've seen in the show up to that point in New Who, and, like, it's, like, exactly what you expect from the 10th Doctor to have. Whereas this one is just so surprising and so different and so crazy. But I just love it. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Definitely. It's the wild card regeneration, and I think it works.
Totally.
What's your number 6?
My number 6 is 11 to 12.
Oh, yeah.
Similar to a lot of things you say, I'm not a huge fan of the episode, but that actual finale, and yes, Amy's presence does overwhelm it, but the thing that does it for me is that snap to Capaldi. It's so sentimental and so saccharine, and Matt Smith's performance is brilliant, the music is brilliant, everyone's doing a top-tier job, but just the fact that she reaches out and he goes, hey, and then BAM! There's Capaldi, big eyes staring at her.
Yeah.
You know, just like a wild, feral animal ready to attack. He just doesn't know what's going on. And then, you know, the fact that his first word is, kidneys! I still got kidneys. I don't like the colour. You know, it's this sort of mad, voracious scene that it just sort of goes from this very controlled, sentimental environment, snap into this utter fireworks show of an appearance, and I really love that. I don't have much more to say beyond that, because I just think that entrance of Capaldi is what saves it. The fact that it's like whiplash, bam, he's here, and he's insane.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also what I'll mention is that I didn't mention already is I think my favourite part of Matt's performance is when Clara says, you know, you are the Doctor, and he says, yep, and I always will be.
Yes.
But times change, and so must I, and he holds up his hand.
Yeah.
That part's fantastic.
And the way he just the way he takes his bow tie off as well, and the way it's shot as it falls to the floor, I really like that.
Yeah, it's I like how Moffat went for almost the complete opposite of what Davies did with Tennant, where rather than it being like a man who succumbed to his ego and his whole life was, you know, it spiraled into sadness. It's an kind old man who has run his course to the end, and he knows what's coming and he's accepting it, but he's also sad. You know, it's really it is very fairy tale, but it does it quite well.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. So right then, should I move on to my next one?
Yeah, go for it.
Right, so a bit like when you put the 12th Doctor one where you did, my next one is one that you ranked really low. My number 5 is the 4th Doctor's from Legopolis.
Okay.
So, I think my opinions were fairly similar to yours when I hadn't seen the episode and I'd only seen the scene.
Yeah.
But then, earlier this year, I watched Legopolis, and it completely changed my point of view on that scene.
Yeah.
Because I finally understood what the hell the Watcher was. Because it's a really weird thing where if you haven't seen the story, you're like, whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But the fact that season 18 deliberately characterizes the 4th Doctor as a man who's world-weary, and it's all about entropy. And the Watcher is the first time in the show, and it's I think the only other time we really properly got something like this was with Tennant, with the 4 Nox.
Yeah.
It's the first time that they said, well, what if the Doctor knew he was going to die before he did? And I like that. I really like the whole thing of sometimes when a Time Lord is about to die, they see a mirror of themselves in this form.
Yes.
But there's so much about it that's left sort of as a mystery.
Yeah, it's a very ethereal.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love the fact that throughout the entire of Legopolis, the Doctor, he knows he's going to die. Which makes his... what's great about that is that makes the Doctor reckless, and basically, when he sees the opportunity to put himself at risk for the better good, he does it. Because he knows that he's going to die anyway, so he has to do something. And obviously the story at the scale of Legopolis, you know, the whole universe is in danger because of this, and it was very sciencey and had the Master involved, who again was coming off the previous story, Keeper of Traken. Jeffrey Beaver's Master had stolen Nessa's father's body.
Yeah.
So you get all of that. And what I like about the scene, especially I think the Blu-ray version has actually improved on this, because you do see the bit where he falls, finally.
Yes, indeed.
But what I was going to say is that, firstly, I love the fact that, like, in the scene leading up to it, you see him standing in the tower with the Master, and he just knows what's about to happen. And so that's what I like about it, because the Doctor is essentially just fearless, and he puts his own self in harm's way to stop what's going on. Obviously, the Master escapes in his TARDIS, but that part where he's on that sort of rope thing, a cable thing, and he sees flashbacks to all his enemies. Yes, yeah. And it's like, and then obviously he holds on, but then he falls and dies. And probably my favorite thing about the whole scene is the music. The music's great. The Legopolis score is incredible. And then, you get the bit where he sees all his companions, but I just love the face that Tom has on when he's fallen, and you can see that, you can just see him, he looks dead inside. Yeah. And then, finally, at the end, tying it all back to the very beginning, you get that grin from, that early grin that he'd always had. Yes, yeah. And he says that line, "It's the end, but the moment has been prepared for." Because obviously he saw the Watcher early on in the story. And another thing, I absolutely love the special effects they used for the transition. When the Watcher comes in and he shrinks up into this sort of white corpse, and then you get this young, baby-faced Davison come through. Yeah. I really like it. I think it's I think season 18 as a whole has been given a bad rap by a lot of people, because it's different to the rest of the Baker era. It's not this, big, adventure with lots of laughter and silly antics, and doesn't have the gothic horror of the Hinchcliffe era, but it's really deliberately different. It's very heavy on its themes and its ideas and its world-weary, entropic, concepts. Totally. And this regeneration scene just caps off that whole arc in season 18, and it's a really, I think it's a really ballsy move, but I think having Tom Baker's regeneration and his whole last season be completely the opposite of what his era and character is, it actually works for me. Yeah. I totally get that. And I think also Tom, again, like we said with William Hartnell, Tom Baker, the actor, being ill during this season, it just adds to that. It adds to the death. Totally. So it does, yeah. Yeah. Because even though Tom Baker hated working on that season, I would argue it's his best acting in the whole show. Because, obviously he's so entertaining when he's being funny, and also, he's being, you get the brooding elements in, season 13 and 14. But what season 18 did was that by stripping a lot of those elements back, he became very dramatic as an actor, and he showed some very different sides that we hadn't seen before from his acting, and he really comes through with it. He upped his game. And a lot of the frustration he had behind the scenes, he channeled into his performance, and it was great. And that's, again, all of that just ties into why I like that regeneration scene a lot. Yeah. Yeah. That's why I've chosen it to be that high. Fantastic. Your number 5.
10 to 11, end of time. It's big, explosive. It was the blockbuster farewell. It was, whatever. It's sort of like the farewell to the show, the version of the show that I grew up with as a kid. It's flawed, as we were talking about before, but it's one that I couldn't put below 5 purely because of its significance to me personally, in terms of my experience with the show and the performance and the music and everything, and the way he just blows the TARDIS up. Just out of pure emotion.
Apparently that was I watched the Doctor Who Confidential for End of Time recently. Apparently that was a Euros Lynn decision, not a Russell.
Right. Yeah. Well, I suppose because it's like, we're never using this scene.
Yeah. We're not going to use it again, so I want him to blow it up. But then they did use it again in Doctor's Wife and Day of the Doctor.
worth it. But yeah, it's the end of time. As you said, a lot of the best stuff about this episode comes before the regeneration itself. However, the regeneration itself is unique in the way that the Doctor's like, no, thank you, and it's like quite depressing.
Yeah, it's really like the thing is that most regenerations are like they really hold you on with like hope and moving forward. This one's really sad. Like it's
wrought with anguish. Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's the whole thing's been building up to it, and it's this thing of, you know, that final farewell as the music swells as he blows up the TARDIS around him, and the music keeps going, and then Matt Smith emerges, and the music just just completely changes, and then it swings into this new gear. I just really like it, and I don't have more to say about it than that. Also, I've pretty much covered it when you
Also, like I said, even though I'm not a big fan of that scene with Matt Smith in End of Time, what I will say is, having watched the Doctor Who Confidential, the fact that his first scene he shot for the show is one of the most dangerous scenes they ever filmed in the show, because there's rubble flying around, there's fire, it's really dangerous. Because at least with Tennant, he got to stand still in a safe zone, whereas Matt Smith had to run around the TARDIS when there's fire and there's brimstone and bloody debris everywhere.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, and he only had one take.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. It just shows the sort of level of professionalism that he had at such a young age.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, is that your number 5?
That was my number 5.
Okay, that means it's my number 4, right? Okay, oh boy, this is when we get to the top tier for me. My number 4 is the 8th Doctors from Night of the Doctor. Oh, wow. It's so good. Moffat wrote a better regeneration for McGann than he did for his own Doctors.
This is true.
Yeah, so it's not just the 8th Doctor, it's the 8th Doctor from Big Finish.
Yes, it is.
And not only that, it's so unique in the sense that the Sisterhood of Khan have this different kind of, Time Lord science where you can master.
It's mystic almost.
Yeah, because there's theories before about like the Doctor subconsciously choosing a face, like he did with Capaldi with Visor Pompeii, and there's obviously theories about the 6th Doctor and Maxwell, and then there's also like there's all sorts of things, right? And here you get, and obviously with Destiny of the Daleks, Romana chose the face of whoever that character was, and it's implied that with advanced Time Lord signs you can control what you look like to an extent.
Yes,
whereas because
and you can do it to the best.
Whereas because the Doctor passed with 51%, like they say in the Rivals Operation, he's a bit useless. He doesn't really know how to work a TARDIS.
Yeah.
I like the fact that he's on Khan and he's gonna die, but they say to him, you can control what you want for this regeneration without advanced Time Lord science. And that perfectly goes into the fact that he wants to be a warrior because he realizes that this war doesn't need a Doctor anymore.
Yes.
And McGann's performance in Night of the Doctor is just exquisite. I love it.
Yeah, it's superb.
And and I love, one of my favorite lines from that whole scene is actually, "Will it hurt? Yes. Good."
Good. Yeah.
And then obviously you get the bit where he says, Charlie carries Lucy Tamsy Molly, although to be fair that's aged now because he's got new companions.
Yes, indeed.
But he says, friends, companions, I salute you, and Cass, I apologize. Physician, he thyself. And it's just so good. And I love the fact when he regenerates, he actually screams in terror.
Yeah.
The price to pay to become a warrior, and it's just, the whole thing is brilliant. And then you get that bit with young John Hurt in the mirror, and he says, "Doctor, no more."
Yeah.
I love it.
It's flawless. It's truly flawless.
Absolutely. And the only reason it's not higher is probably because Night of the Doctor is only a mini episode.
Yeah.
The other 3 above it, I get pretty much equal positive out of. It's just that because they're full stories, they have more of a build up to them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if you've done the maths, the 3 that I have above it are from stories that are in my top 10 of all time. So there you go. But yeah, Eighth Doctor, Night of the Doctor is excellent. It's so good. What's your number 4?
My number 4 is the 9th Doctor to the 10th Doctor.
Ah, yes.
And I will tell you for why. Because of the hope that is in Eccleston's face. And that it's that probably the best example of a doctor accepting their fate.
Mm.
And he just, even though it's one season and it was a banger of a season, he just resonates with this whole other level of importance and significance because, he's the one that came back and revived. Even I know it's more than just Eccleston, but the 9th Doctor being the face of the show and it being so successful off his back, there's this sort of metatextual level there, which means, so was I. It's like, yes, Chris, you were fucking incredible. And it just, I don't know, it's a lot of these for me, it's just sort of emotional responses, how they resonate with me emotionally beyond, because we're just talking about usually like maybe 4 minutes of screen time per them, or maybe 4 to 8, depending on which scenario it is. And this one's so brief, it's simply the Doctor reassuring Rose and telling her to stand back, and the music sort of swelling, and then BAM! He disappears, and we get that first reveal of David Tennant, and the transition's done beautifully. It doesn't dwell on it too long, but it's also not so fast for that first new regeneration that it seems confusing or distracting. And it's just brilliantly brought to life. I just really, really love it. Especially it coming off of The Parting of the Ways as a story as well. Just elevates it so much.
Mm-hmm. Alright. My number 3? Mm-hmm. My number 3 is the 5th Doctor from the Caves of Androzani.
Ah, yes.
So, obviously you get the whole story. The story is incredible. And you get the scene where, he found the bat's milk and he carries Perry on the battlefield back to the TARDIS.
Yeah.
The 5th Doctor finally the hero that he wished he always was. Just completely rounding off his character arc and then selflessly reviving Perry and knowing that he's going to die. Doesn't take the bat smell for himself.
Without a second question,
Absolutely. The most selfless Doctor. And my favourite line of dialogue from Peter Davison in the whole of his run is this death? I love that. I love that line. It's so Robert Holmes. Like, it's just a very small line, but it means so much. When he says, "Is this death?" It's so there's so much uncertainty about will he regenerate this time. And
it's the sort of, is this it? Is this the end of Doctor Who?
Mm-hmm. And the fact that he got poisoned at the very start of the story in part 1. And the fact that it's like he's been holding it on, so he's been holding it off, because there's that bit in part 3 where he shakes because he's trying not to regenerate. Yes, yeah. And he's just constantly holding it out because he wants to save Perry's life. And then
because he's selfless. He's
absolutely,
just being a hero.
Absolutely, and then you get that scene where he's feels different this time, and you get the companions. You get the companions talking to him, and the part that really hits is when you get all the companions like Nissa and Tegan and Chameleon and Turlo. They're saying, like, we need you. Actually, no, to be fair, with, like, Nissa and Tegan and Chameleon, it's like, we need you, Doctor, we need you. And then, I love the fact that Turlo's line, obviously because of him being quite a grey character, he says, your enemies will be wanting your death, Doctor. He's very pessimistic, glass half empty.
Yeah.
Your enemies will be delighting your death, Doctor, is what he said. And then the moment where it really hits is when Eirich appears and he says, you know that, Doctor? Because obviously Davison, he was the reason that Eirich died. He was responsible for looking after him, and Eirich died under his watch. And he had so much regret because of that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you get the brilliant happy part where Anthony Ainley comes in and says, no, my dear Doctor, you must die.
Yeah.
And I kind of like the headcanon theory that the Master caused the Sixth Doctor to happen.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, I like that too.
Yeah. And then, of course, you get the bit where Colin comes up and says, "Change, my dear, but it seemed not a moment too soon."
Too soon.
Yeah. It's brilliant. The whole story is brilliant, and the regeneration scene is great, and it's like... It's just exactly... Like, when you say, like, Robert Holmes does a regeneration story, it's exactly what you think. The lines are so deliberate, they're all so... The pieces of dialogue are small, but they mean so much. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Your number 3.
My number 3 is the Third Doctor to the Fourth Doctor from Planet of the Spiders. Because, look, it's...
I wonder why.
It's the farewell to John Pertwee, who's my favourite Doctor, as a lot of people probably know by now. And his as you were saying, it's sort of this it becomes a 4-person, back and forth. But really, it's about the Sarah Jane, the Brigadier, and the Doctor after they've been on so many adventures together, and just the way all of their characters interact in these final moments, and then suddenly when it's like, oh, the change is happening just before the credits, and the Brigadier's like, well, here we go again, and the music swells, and the Doctor's face changes. We don't get to see what Tom Baker's doing, we just get to see his face, and the way that transition is just so underplayed and subtle for it being the bridge between two of the biggest personalities that the Doctor has had, the sort of two of the most outlandish and assertive.
Yet they're so different as well.
Yeah, totally different. And I just really, really love how understated it is. It is goofy and it is a little bit dated, but I just really, really like how understated it is. And obviously there is a bias for me here because John Pertwee is my favourite Doctor, and I just like the way he went out.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole scene of him dying, it just feels like exactly what you expect. Like it's the gentlemanly death on stage,
Yeah, it's like he's been, well, he has been. He's been poisoned. It's that sort of, it's that grandiose farewell without any of the bombast that typically goes along with it. It's just the intimacy, and I really like it.
All right, my number 2.
Let's go for it.
Second Doctor from the War Games. So obviously there's a bias here. The War Games is my favourite story. So that will take a big impact on that. The reason why I love the regeneration in the War Games is that we see, there's a side of the Second Doctor that is hinted throughout his era. You see it in the under his performance in Power of the Daleks from the beginning.
Yes. And
you see it in an episode like Evil of the Daleks, and you see it especially in the Web of Fear when he tries to steal the Great Intelligence, but fails. And I love the fact that throughout his whole time, this whole lovely, bumbling fool is... it's all a facade. And whilst I do genuinely believe he loves his companions, that... sort of old grandfatherly, silly Doctor is very much a mask for who he truly is. Because when Jamie isn't around, you often see sides to the Second Doctor that you don't normally see. And in the War Games Part 10, once his companions are gone, and he's faced the Time Lords, he's completely honest. And he's not happy about being regenerated.
Yeah,
forced, like he was murdered by the Time Lords in an execution. He was executed in a trial.
Yeah,
and I just love how not only is it that he's also having his TARDIS taken away from him and being put into exile. And I just love how he's like, you can't change what I look like without consulting me. And coming off that whole story, just seeing it's there's so much complexity to that whole scene character-wise, because on one hand it's this character that you love that you don't want to see suffer and die, but it's also a very devious man getting his just desserts, because this execution for him is something that he actually deserves when you think about it. And I recall when I first watched the War Games a few years ago, and also again when I rewatched this year, there's just something so sinister about the way he dies and the way the Time Lords, the way they execute him, and The way he just completely loses control of his senses and his body. Like, one of my biggest fears is like being possessed. And the way his just body gets possessed and he's like, oh, you're making me giddy.
It's horrific, yeah.
It's horrific. It's very similar in a way to the Seventh Doctor's death in the movie, except it's more like a film noir.
Yeah.
And I just love the dread and the fact that him disappearing into darkness is the cliffhanger to the end of the story and the end of the 60s, really.
Yeah.
I just love it. It's very... The whole visual setup of it is very simplistic, but that works. I love the way how it's the Doctor by himself in this just abyss.
Yeah.
With no more friends around him, and it's... Yeah, it has the tragedy that you get like with Tennant's Doctor with I Don't Want to Go, but it also has the horror of the Seventh Doctor's death as well, and the whole story leading up to it, and the way it caps off Troughton's character arc. It's just great. It's amazing. The only reason it's not number one is, obviously I'll get into the reason why the one at the top's number one for nostalgia reasons. But like I can't criticize it. It's great. I actually also, as a kid, it used to frustrate me that I didn't see him turn into Pertwee in the scene. But now that I've seen the story itself, I'm fine with it. I think it's actually
absolutely
the mystery of Left, if you don't know what's happening to him and you don't know what he's going to look like next, is actually quite good. Yeah, so that's why it's my number 2. What is your number 2?
The Eighth Doctor to the War Doctor in the Night of the Doctor. As I said before, it's flawless. McGann's performance is the big finish. Doctor come to life. Moffat's script is just comes out swinging and it doesn't miss a beat until the very end. And the Doctor no more at the end as it changes and it sets a mood going forward for the Day of the Doctor. The fact that, as you said, he screams in pain like this thing is agony. He's poisoning himself to create this new aggressive warrior persona. I just really, really love it. And the fact that it is a mini episode is both a detriment and a positive, because the detriment means that it is a little bit undercooked in terms of build up towards it, as you were saying, but it also is a positive because it's so focused that it's just like, okay, he just nailed it. It's not bogged down in any superfluous external plots or
because
it's just like,
you know,
there is a war on, and
knowing Stephen Moffat, like, that could have happened if he made it a 45-minute episode.
Exactly. He's like, you need to just be focused on this thing. The Doctor of Big Finish refusing to join the war, which is tied into where the narrative has gone since, but also was going before. And it just ties in beautifully, and it's also just a wonderful thing to have on screen. It's just a delightful gift that Moffat did not need to do, but he thought for the 50th we absolutely should have.
Yeah, and it was a big surprise because, you know, given, like, I mean, obviously not everyone will agree with this, but given how sloppily written a lot of Series 7 was, and then for this to come right after it and for it to be so good.
Yeah, it was just it's an utter delight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
Like, it really surprised Moffat. Like, he's always surprising. He always catches you off guard. Like, when he's going to be great, you never expect. Of course, with Russell's era, obviously, but when I'm talking about his era himself, when he's good, it's never when you think it'll be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Right. Does that mean we have hit our number ones?
Correct, we have indeed.
Okay, my number 1 is the Ninth Doctor's in the Parting of the Ways. So, there is a lot of reasons for this. Like you said, the scene itself is fantastic, especially for the first one of New Who. But the main reason why it's number 1 is it's the first one I ever saw. And it's the only... Well, I suppose with the Eighth Doctor it was a surprise when it came out, but then once I started watching it, I sort of figured out what was going to happen. But out of all the Regenerations, it's the only one I've watched where I didn't know it was going to happen when it happened.
Right.
So that element of surprise was massive for me. And yeah, just again, like I've said, Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways is the most nostalgic I ever have for the show. I spoke about this when we were talking about the score. and the episode itself when we reviewed it. I have no more nostalgia for this show than watching that two-parter. It was the moment I became a fan, and one of the biggest reasons for it was that regeneration scene. And it's just so perfect for Eccleston. Despite the fact that whatever was going on behind the scenes, he delivered such a perfect ending for his character that rounded off that character arc of him coming out of the Time War really depressed, and then with him on this adventure with Rose, finding himself again, finding the Doctor again. And the fact that Russell, who found out very late in the game that his main actor was going to leave and he was going to have to replace him, had to write in the scene, and yet it's so good. It's so perfect for the Ninth Doctor. And it's just, everything about it is brilliant. I love the whole thing of the Ninth Doctor almost, like, not lying to Rose, but being a bit, like, sugarcoating the situation. You know, she says she can't remember what happened, and he says, I sang a song and the Daleks ran away.
Yeah.
And, but then, of course, like, he's being all, like, chipper and, upbeat, but then, of course, when you cut to the other side, he looks over at his hand, and you see that look on his face, like, he's like, I know what's about to happen to me. Yeah. And then it's just, everything from there is so good. All the dialogue, him just explaining what's happening, but it's not sluggish and it's not boring. It's really interesting with the way he explains regeneration, but it's left with enough mystery for you not to know enough about it. Yeah. And then obviously you get you were absolutely fantastic, and you know what, so was I. And then the smile, and then he bursts into energy, and then you see Tennant come in, and then new teeth. That's weird, and it's so like, whoa, what the hell's going on here? I think it was just the perfect first regeneration for me to watch as a child.
Yeah, absolutely, and it just captures the imagination because it's unlike any other TV show.
And I just love the fact that it's like, you've gone through an entire first series of this show, and then just when you thought you knew everything about this character, he completely changes. And that, again, captures what was great about the one from the 10th Planet as well, is that you'd spent so much time with the Doctor, and you finally thought you figured out this enigma of a person, and then he changes. Yeah. It's great. The Ninth Doctor's regeneration, for me, just kind of captures as a whole what this show's all about. And it's just, it's amazing. What's your number one? I think we already know what it is.
It's the Caves of Androzani, the 5th Doctor, the 6th Doctor. It just exemplifies everything that the Doctor should be. I mean, obviously every Doctor's different, but that spirit that's deep inside. It's the same reason why I love the War Doctor's regeneration, because he realizes that he still is the same man that he is when Peter Davison regenerates. It's that spirit of empathy, that spirit of being there when needed, no matter the cost. And it's this determination and drive, and it's so beautifully exemplified throughout the whole story. But the regeneration itself, as you said, you see the companions, and then you see the Master taunting him, and then bam, out of the blue comes this arrogant man. That's 3 eyes in one sentence. Makes you sound rather conceited, young lady. And it's Colin Baker being Colin Baker, coming off of such a gentle and kind Doctor who would do anything. It's just for me, it's the perfect regeneration, because there's a right amount of emotional weight to it, but also thematic intent behind it, and also I think how it ties up the end of the character.
One of the best things
version of the Doctor.
One of the best things Robert Holmes did with the Caves of Androzani, he told a very relatable story in the sense of, like, in this instance, like, nice guys don't finish last. This was the exception to the rule where nice guys finish first. Well,
it was that thing of the heroic sacrifice, but it wasn't the typical, I'm just going to blow myself up in a thing to save you some time.
Well, like Independence Day.
Exactly, it wasn't that kind of Independence Day farewell. It was a farewell, not of violence, but of sympathy. It was a sacrifice of patience, and it just elevates the Doctor as a character, both the Doctors that came before and the Doctors that come after, because for me it's just the exemplification of what is at the heart of the character that makes him such a good
hero. And it's like the fact that someone like Eirich had died under his watch before. He's like, I'm not going to let this happen ever again.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely.
And again, like, if we want to tie that into something else that we really like, again, it's like with Tennant losing Rose in the series 2 finale, and then you get Gridlock when Martha gets taken, and he says, I don't want this to happen again. You know?
Mm-hmm.
It's great.
It is. It's just terrific.
Yes.
I can't do it any more justice. It's just the best. I just love it so much.
Mm-hmm. And I just love the way that Peter Davison, the way he plays it, is that despite the fact that he's done this incredible thing, he doesn't gloat, he doesn't brag, he doesn't go all over it. He treats it like it's normal, you know?
Totally. It just is what it is.
Yeah, there's only enough for you. I might regenerate. It
also ties into obviously, this Doctor has a bit of a different reaction to it, but the instinctive, of course I would, where the 10th Doctor gets into the chamber to let Wilfred out. It's that, even though that 10th Doctor is sick of regenerating, and it's a sort of, it's an updated, view on this particular type of story, that core element of the Doctor who always would is still there, despite the 10th Doctor throwing a hissy fit beforehand.
Raging against the dying of the light, as David said in the Doctor Who Confidential.
Yes.
But of course he would. He'd always do it. Yeah. So that was our ranking of the Regenerations.
That's it.
I think most of them are fantastic. And again, like I said, I hope Big Finish with the Ninth Doctor, they give an ending to that War Doctor one, because that would be great.
That would be fantastic.
Absolutely, just like they did a prequel one to the Sixth Doctor one.
Yes, yeah, that tied everything all together.
Absolutely.
Elevated it.
The only other thing that we didn't mention though is that there's been a couple of like surprise regenerations where they reversed it. Like we got in the Stolen Earth, there was obviously the 10th Doctor to the 10th Doctor, which led to the whole meta crisis. And then you've got the fake one in The Impossible Astronaut, and you've also got the fake one in The Lie of the Land. And off those, one thing I will say is, if there was anyone that was going to do a surprise regeneration, it would be Chris Chibnall.
Yes.
I'm kind of hoping that when Jodie regenerates, it's not like announced. It's not deliberate.
Well, think of something I really respect about Chibnall is, obviously, I think it was known that the Cybermen were coming back, but Sacha Dhawan's role in the latest series, I'm sure it was leaked somewhere, but compared to when John Sim came back, Chris Chibnall runs a tight ship when it comes to spoilers, and I really respect that about him. Because
same with Joe Martin as well.
Yes. Oh God. Yes. And Jack. What? Yeah. Of course. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think if there was anything to do a surprise regeneration, it would be Chibnall, and I am interested to see how he handles the Jodie one.
Yes.
Because I want to see if he goes for something a bit different to what we've had before. I think that would be...
Because I have a feeling he might not go the sentimental route.
Yeah.
But, that's a video for another time, speculating on regeneration or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah. But I have a funny feeling that Chris Chibnall would be the kind of person to do, a scene like we got in The Stolen Earth, but it's actually her regeneration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be quite something.
Very interesting. Alright, so, anything else you want to say before we wrap up the video?
No, just hope you enjoyed the video, everyone, and tell us your rankings in the comments.
Absolutely. And, so, with that said, we will see you tomorrow for day 3.
Adios.